Welcome back, everyone, for our continuation of the AppGyver Day here as part of Devtoberfest. If you've been tuning in throughout the day or catching up on the recordings, you know we've already had 4 very exciting sessions all around AppGyver. We started the day with a getting started building apps fast with SAP AppGyver. We saw a sneak peek of some of the new functionality that's coming to AppGyver, specifically in the area of the SAP BTP integration with AppGyver and some of the cool new features there. We had the Creator Spotlight, where we got to meet several of the very creative and people that are using AppGyver to build things and share them with the community. And then we saw how to make your apps more beautiful, design patterns, getting pixel perfect look and feel to your AppGyver apps. Now, this session is AppGyver for Pro Code developers, and then it will be followed shortly after with a session on tips and tricks from an SAP AppGyver guru. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter today to go all through AppGyver for Pro Code developers. And as a Pro Code developer myself, I'm really looking forward to the session. So, Akseli, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. So, hi everyone. Good evening, good morning, good time of day, wherever you are. It's an evening in Helsinki, Finland for me. I want to thank you for joining me for this AppGyver for Pro Code developers session. In this session, of course, we remember that AppGyver is a no-code tool first and foremost, but that doesn't mean that there isn't things that we can use our pro coding skills with. And today, I have the following agenda for you. First, we're going to do a little thing to get really ready for pro coding. And after that, we're going to take a look at some custom components in AppGyver. So how to build your own components. So we all know that there's a big library of like these ready-made components available to you straight from the get-go in AppGyver, but we can also make our own components, and we'll be taking a look how to do that through an example. And after that, we'll take a little look at custom logic and JavaScript. There's a couple of interesting ways we can make use of JavaScript in AppGyver, and I think you'll find that very interesting as well. And actually, with that, I think it's time for me to start demoing things here. So I'll be transitioning over here to my AppGyver. Today, I'm working in the AppGyver Community Edition. So this is the one that all of you viewers can simply access by going to appgyver.com and signing up. So you should be able to replicate and investigate all of the things that I'm doing here today. So for the first thing, I said I wanted us to really like get ready for professional coding. I've just prepared here in the AppGyver a little something for that. So let me make sure this works. And here I just have a little fun thing for us to get warmed up with. I do want to warn people, if this concerns you, that there's a little bit of flashing lights here. So if you're sensitive to that, then just be aware. And with that, let's get ready for professional coding. And yes, this is all made in AppGyver. So I guess this is my answer to the question, can you do custom layouts in SAP AppGyver? And yes, you can do quite a bit of things here with animations and doing all kinds of interesting things with professional code. Now, I'm sure half of the audience thinks this was awesome, and half of you think that this was very stupid, and you are both completely correct. It was awesomely stupid. And with that, let's get into custom components. We can also, if there's great demand, we can at the end maybe talk about how to get something like this in your AppGyver app, but we don't have to at all. So onwards to custom components. I'll do this in a kind of baking show style. So I'm going to show you what we get at the end. Then I'm going to show you a little bit how to get on your way. But in the interest of getting through as many interesting things as possible, I'm not going to be doing these step by step since our hour doesn't quite stretch that far. So I'll just show you how to get started, where the important buttons for that are, and then I'll talk about the ready-made demos and what they do and how do they achieve things. So here I have something that I made a new component for displaying a temperature. And this component is a bit special since it has this thermometer icon, and then it has the temperature. And we can see that with cooler temperatures, we get a blue text, and then with warmer temperatures, we get this more orangey text. And also, if you have a very keen eye for iconography, you can see that if the temperature gets lower, we're actually using the kind of the not so full thermometer icon, and then around the 0, we are using the halfway full, and at +30, we're using the full icon. So with that explanation out of the way, let's jump into AppGyver, and then let's go to our temperature display demo. And here we can see the component. So if we click on it, it actually says temp display, and this is the brilliant name that I chose for this component. We can also see that it's installed here. So here it says DevTober temperature display. And as I said, it has an input for temperature. And on the right side here, we can actually see that it has a couple of custom inputs. So if we just remember, how does our regular text component, for example, look like? If we drag from here a text component, we can see it has a content property, number of lines, and a couple of other properties. Whereas our temp display component has a background image, then temperature, and then actually the scale, which is just another text input. So the way this you probably figured out already works is that we take the number here, we render that there, and then we render the scale after it there, and then there's the icon here. Now, how do you go from these pre-made components to your own custom component? That's actually very simple. You always start with a container. So container is a special type of component that sits here as one of the ready-made components. And if I drag a container here, and then let's say I put a text, this is not necessary, but we can, for example, start with a container with a text component inside it. So in the tree here, we can see that we have a container and a text component in it. Now, for example, using the tree display here, we can make sure that we have the container selected. And then here in the right-hand side in the properties, we can actually convert this to a new component. And this makes the magic happen for creating a new component. So you need a container and then optionally some stuff inside it. We'll get to put more stuff inside later too, but this is like, usually maybe the workflow is that you are just making some things here and you use containers and components, and then you come across something like, hey, I'm making this temperature component. Maybe this could be a reusable thing. And then you can basically like just encapsulate everything in a container and start from there. So with that out of the way, we press this button. And then it asks us, are we completely sure we want to do this? Well, of course. And this then takes us, clicking that button for turning this container to a new component, takes us to a place called Component Template Editor. And we can do quite a few things here. We still have all the components here. We do have the logic canvas, and we do have all the properties and styling things. So for example, we can now put in an icon here. And I'm just going to make it so that this text component and the icon, as in my, like the component I showed you, the temp display, they sat side by side. So I'm just going to go here into layout, and I'm going to turn this to horizontal. Well, they're wrong way around, but that fixes that. So, okay, now we have a component with an icon and a text component. And as we do in AppGyver, we save everything all the time. Okay, now, how do we make it so that we actually get this component? Because if we now step out of this component, and if we look at our component, we can see now that, okay, it's text component and an icon component. And if I clone this, yes, it's already a custom component now. Like internally, it has a text component and icon component. But if we look at this properties tab, we don't have any cool properties here. So we are really working only with And these are actually the plain container properties. So if I take a blank container here, you can see that these are the exact same properties as with a blank container. So for that, we have a way of defining new properties for this new custom component. And now for the first time, when I created this, there's this button, convert to new component. But after I've created the component, I actually need to click on this icon here that sits next to the remove component in the properties. So I have my custom component selected. And then by clicking this icon here, I go to the component template editor. And here we are. So to add properties, actually, we notice a little bit of difference here in the component template editor compared to the, let's say, the normal UI canvas editor, whereas we would normally have here the view and variables. Here we actually, in the component template editor, we have view and properties. And if we click on this toggle, that will open all the internal properties for this component. And if we, here on the left side, click on properties, then we can actually see the current properties for the component. And we can indeed also add a property. So we can, for example, add a new property there and have it have the key temp, and then we can say that the property title, aka the kind of the name that you display in the UI. So this is just this sort of technical internal name, and then the title is here. And then we can also specify a type for it. Temperature should probably be a number. That's what we're going for. Example value, well, that's quite a high temperature, but I think we're fine with that. And default value 0, yes, I had no better ideas myself for this, so that will do. And now if we back out of the component template editor, and now we choose this component, now we actually see that we have managed to specify a new property here. So now we have a property on this new component that's still called container1, which we can obviously change also from the settings. We have a new property. So this is called like an input property. I can like, and this has the same binding stuff as all the regular components. So I can bring in here variable values and everything else. It's like becomes instantly, and I can repeat it and do all the stuff that I can do with the native or the, let's say, default AppGyver components or things that you would find from the store. Now, of course, if I now have this 0 here and we go to the preview app, we can still see that it doesn't quite do anything. So now we're putting in values into our component, but there's still another part that we need to do in the component template editor to kind of close this loop. So we'll get back in there. And then we can choose our text component inside the custom component. And we can see here that the text editor, text component, of course, has this content property. And by default, it's bound to this piece of static text here, just some lorem ipsum. But of course, it has this binding icon just as it does outside of a component. So if we click here, excuse me, I'm moving around some zoom elements here. Okay, there we go. And then we can find here, if that went a bit fast. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking the binding icon for the content property. And then instead of static value, I actually here, because I'm inside a component, I have this thing that I normally don't have, which is component properties. And then here I can choose a composite component internal property. And from here, I can actually find the properties, including the new property that I just defined, the temperature one. And one of them is unavailable, yes, because this visibility true false is not compatible with the text field here. So anyway, we choose temperature, and then we actually see our default value like previewed here. So if we do that, now internally in the component, we have done two things. We have specified property, a new property that is, we made it, custom property, temperature. And then the other thing that we did inside the component was that we bound this text component to the internal property. So if you worked with like any component-based framework, you're probably like, well, this is pretty like familiar to me from like React or Angular or really anything that like works with component type of abstraction. Like you have this thing where you have component internal state, and then you have the component template, and you can render things, and it all works very nicely. So let's save, and then we can look at this in the preview, and let's just put a different value there, like, I don't know, 17. It's not that warm in Helsinki at the moment, but I'm being optimistic. And now if I look at my preview, I have my custom component here with the icon, and then my temperature property is being rendered in the text component. And if I do some duplication here and put some other values here, like, I don't know, it's probably more like 10 degrees here. So we'll put that in, and we can see in our thing that, yes, all of these components now, my custom components, they all have a separate internal state. So they're all taking in a temperature property, and then they're displaying it in the text component. And the point I'm trying to make here is that by doing things like this, you can eventually build towards a full component like this. And now I'll transition over to looking a bit inside this thing over here and see what kind of things I've been able to do when I had a bit more time to prepare this custom component. So what is going on with temp display component? By the way, at the end, I'm gonna share the share tokens for all of these components, and we can probably also throw them in the chat. So if you're on the community edition of AppGyver, you can just install this component and see what it has had for lunch and so on. So I'm gonna choose my temperature component, and then I'm gonna use this button here in the right-hand properties to open the component template editor. Now, as I said, this is the basic structure that I used also for this like a bit fancier temperature component. So we have an icon, and then we have a text, but here the text is actually, and we have the same internal properties. So if we look at the internal properties, we have temperature, and we also have the scale, which is just there to add the kind of the relative scale. This is not doing any like temperature math or conversions between Fahrenheit and Celsius or anything like that. It's just for the UI here. So here are the custom properties, scale and temperature. And the way I've used them here, whoops, now we backed out too far. The way I've used them here is actually with a formula binding. And let's see if I can do a good job of explaining what this does. So one thing that you have to solve with the temperature display is that with temperatures, we have this convention that we show the plus sign for positive things as well as minus sign for negative things. And as you may know, like with computer science numbers, we do get the minus signs for free, but positive numbers don't come with plus signs. So this first if statement is basically here to check that if the temperature is above 0, actually the way I've written the check is if the temperature is below 0, we do nothing. We just print like an empty character there. And if it's therefore, if it's above 0, then we'll add a little plus in front of it. And then we have a little bit of spacing there to do like one space between. Again, if you worked with JavaScript, you probably can like understand quite well the pattern here and what we're going with the formatting. And then we're showing the internal property temp, which are, by the way, when you're inside a component, you get these things in your formula editor. So component output values, component internal properties, and here I can look at all of these things and use them. So I'm using the temperature, and then I'm also like attaching the scale to get the signifier, in this case, like the Celsius, just another piece of text there. And that's how this thing works. In my opinion, it's not a lot of wiring for a lot of functionality in a way. And I wouldn't like keep a too high bar in making your own components, because there's very little downside to making them. And even if you use them once, it can still be like a really nice way if you find yourself working a lot with page variables, or like you're sort of like you have hard time scoping things with page variables, or like you just don't like how things work and how they're exposed. And you always have an opportunity, especially if you know about like professional development stuff. You can make your own components, and you can also use them as a way of like putting away things like into the component, so that they get out of your like page scope or like app scope things. So that would be one way of using them. And of course, if you find any reusable things, then that's also a very smart way of using things. Now, there was one other thing which I did here, which was that the icon actually reacts to the temperature level. And here, I think I'm going to get some suggestions in chat how I should have actually done this, but here's one way. So AppGyver has an icon component, and the icon component basically has a range of ready-made like icon library to it, which includes like different versions of the thermometer icon with it like empty, not so full, halfway, and then completely full. And instead of using a static icon here, I have another formula binding controlling the icon. So we can see here how it goes. So the icon set is font awesome, and then we have the icon formula, and then we are just previewing with the full icon. So while I'm working inside AppGyver, they just all show this icon. And if I look at oh, why is this red? Does not matter, because it works anyway. Something about for type mismatching, but actually it doesn't matter. This works anyway. It's just saying that this isn't quite the type that you possibly might want to use here. So what we're doing here is we're actually accessing a thing called a private variable. So we talked about these internal properties, which were scale and temp. But here I actually wanted to introduce one more thing, which is that we don't need to have all the properties, aka variables, coming from the outside. We can also have completely internal variables to the component. And here I've actually specified one for this, like because I want to use the temperature to derive a fill level for the thermometer. So what I have here is a fill level. It's a really uninteresting variable. It's just a number, and what it does is basically it's this. Oh yeah, I need to show you how do we get the fill level. So let's go out of here, and then actually in the logic canvas. And now this is the logic canvas for this component. So in the logic canvas, what we're doing is we have a little bit different events than usual. We, for example, have an event for when the component is mounted. So normally on a page, you would have an event for the page is mounted. Here in the component, we have an event for when the component is mounted. And mounted here means when the application is ready, when we have all the inputs to at the beginning of the application, when we have all the inputs ready, we know the values. So we, for example, typed in 12 there as a starting value, and then the component boots up with that value and starts going. So that's what it means is when it's mounted. So when we have all the inputs and everything's kind of ready in the application and the component is being loaded. And here I'm basically doing this thing. So my way of, and this is the part where you probably have different ideas. So I was just thinking, to make a fill level, I need to kind of normalize the whatever the number going in is. And here I actually assume that it's Celsius. So I'm converting this just to kelvins to get a number that's basically on this like plus or minus like 100 scale. So if we're like above 100, it means a certain thing. And if we're below 100, and we could make this. But the point was just to normalize the temperature range so that we can look at it in an analytical way, and we don't have to write like logic. Well, if it's plus 30, then it's fill it, and then if it's below 0, rather we have like one number that basically it's around either like a positive number or negative number, and then we can control things. So that's what I did there. And the way it's used here is then we are looking at the fill level, which basically will be a number either below exactly or above 100, because I just wanted to put it into like a positive space with no fractions. So if the fill level is below 100, we're doing thermometer empty. And then I have actually, this is a little bit awkward, and I hope this formula editor gets upgraded in the future so that, but what we're doing here is basically we have then a nesting if to check, well, if the fill level is exactly 100, then we show the thermometer half, and if it's something else, then we're showing thermometer full. And that's how we end up with this ability of showing the icon. So that's a little bit of work to get like one icon to work, but conceptually it's not very difficult, and more importantly, it's not very different from what you would do when working with professional developer tools to kind of like figure out this internal property and derive something from the thing. So I think that's all the time I want to spend on the temperature display, but I'll pause here for comments or questions.
Yeah, this is a good spot to pause because we've got a couple. So the first question is related to components in general. If you want to take an existing complex component and then make our own version of it, but not override the existing component, how do you do that?
I mean, you stick it in a container. So if you think about it, like I did not end up overloading the text component by doing any of this. So if I'm like, if I'm like, I want a specific text component, or let's say I want specific image component, then what I would simply do is I make a container and then I put an image in there, and then I turn. Okay, now my tree is messed up, but this is probably the one that I wanted. So, and now I can basically call this my custom image component. And if we think about it, then what we have here is now I can like put an image in here, and oh yeah, and actually if I go into the component, then I probably want to wire a property called source into the inner image component. So you can just build like this facade for the component that you want to clone. Like that's the easiest way I can think of, like without complicating your life. Is just like, okay, just put it in a container and wire it its like default inputs how you want. And you could also use this to simplify the existing components. Like let's say you have something with multiple inputs, but you just want to use a bunch of defaults and wire one of them like out of your custom component. You could like create that kind of facade for a component as well, if that makes sense.
Okay. The next question is specifically back to the demo that you just showed with the temperature control, and the person's asking, how does the fill level that you showed us update if the temperature changes? So I think so. I don't have in my demo, like these are not editable and dynamic, but basically my guess would be, and we're not going to test this now, but my sort of guess would be that basically, you know, these are live. So my fill level is kind of like, if you think about it, oh yeah, and here I'm doing it in the component mount event. So yeah, this would not work if we would change the temperature. So this is a kind of design constraint, but let me see if we have a, so it would work like this. We would use this. So I would hook this as well to the fill level. So what I did there was I used this receive event node here, and then that allows me to specify one of the custom events. And in AppGyver, you get a custom event for every variable changing, which is, by the way,
incredibly useful in a lot of scenarios, especially if you come in with this like React and or like that sort of mindset where you have these update loops and things. So what I would do here probably is then use the internal property temperature changed and then just update my fill level based on that. Like that's what I would do. But yes, there's a little bit of an assumption in my component since I didn't have the temperatures. This is just like a display component, but that's how you would do it. Just like listen for the property or variable change. And by the way, you can, like, if you didn't know, you can do this for any app variable or page variable and do really cool things just by listening to variable changes. You can drive lots of interesting things from there.
Very nice. And we've got one more question, and this is about version control. How are new components version controlled, basically? Do we fork the new component from the old, or is it separately controlled?
So I think here, at least now that I'm working in the community edition here, so what you basically do here is you can sort of overwrite local components, but it's basically it's like a single stack. You can, or let me put it in this way: you can have instances that have changes, but then you can overwrite from any instance to the like temp, like overwriting the component template too. So, but it's kind of this converging process. So you can always have like a customized custom component, but then the only way you can version it really is making it the real version, the kind of the abstract version of that component. So that's probably how you want to do it, is by stacking them in that way.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we have so far in the chat.
Good. Let's move forward then. So I promised you custom logic and JavaScript, and I guess first we'll look at a relatively simple thing. So I made this. I tried to think of something that's simple but still kind of hard to maybe do with the formula editor, and one of them is probably like looking if something is a prime number. So if we, so now this is a test for the audience: is 5 a prime number? Yes, it is prime. And then if we input 4, it's not a prime number. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but basically my understanding of prime numbers is naive, and it's that they are numbers which are basically only divisible by themselves and 1. So that's the idea, and great expense and scientific effort is spent looking for them. We're not going to look for prime numbers, but we do need some, or let's say I use some JavaScript to be able to look if a certain number is prime or not. Because if you think about it, how to implement this thing, like, is it divisible by anything else than itself or 1? Then one really like simple way of implementing this check is simply like a loop where you just keep dividing the target number with growing numbers, and then if it's divisible by something else, either you run into the number itself or you run into some number that's smaller than it, which can be used to divide the number, and then you know it's not prime. Basically, that's the explanation. And if we go to this, whoops, let's save there. If we go to these prime numbers, okay, we needed to save for some reason a couple of times there. Okay, so if we go to this prime numbers page, so we just have an input that puts a number in a variable called num, and then we have the button that checks if num is prime. And this is all very regular stuff here until this point where we actually have a flow function called devtober is prime, which I can tell you, if you didn't figure out, doesn't ship with AppGyver by default. So we unfortunately, I mean, yet, like, it should ship with lots of devtober functions, but as of now, it does not. So what is happening here? What this is actually a little custom flow function, which was created, and then this has a JavaScript node within it. And before I show you what's inside the node, I just do a little bit of memory refreshing. So here we have the JavaScript node under advanced. It's in the same place as where you get the events. And this is basically like a box where you have an input and an output, and then you can write some JavaScript in between in this editor. And what you can also do with these JavaScript boxes is you can press this button that turns it into a new flow function. And what that basically does is what we have here is that it creates this outer appearance of a flow function and puts the JavaScript inside it. You can also create flow functions from non-JavaScript flow functions by taking a bunch of them and then putting it in. But creating a new flow function is basically like, again, like an abstraction layer. Like it gives me a box where I can stick things inside it, and then I have to look into the box to actually see how it works. And this, as professional developers, we know is useful in many ways. So let's click on this. Here's just some code from some example of like that I adapted for AppGyver on the prime number search. So it basically does this looping thing that I was talking about. Like we're just taking number and then we're going until we find either the number itself or we find a lower number, smaller number that can be used to divide the number evenly, and then we know it's not prime. And so this is just your regular JavaScript code. Everything like the ES6 stuff works great here. What we have here is simply the flow function input. So if we remember here, if we exit this, so component tab, and then we are actually our custom flow function has an input called input1. Where we're simply binding the num value. So the form element is basically adjusting this number page variable, and then we're just putting that whenever we press the button into this devtober is prime function. And that's how we get this input. So input1 here is the whatever number we have. And the way you use it, I'll just step through the code here, is you have this thing here called inputs, as it tells you here, and then you can have many different inputs and you could bind them to other things. Like, for example, if I just type here something, and like I could, again, like the inputs can be the flow function inputs, which I showed you, which that one is, but an input can be also anything else. Like we can just pull from an app variable or like some formula or something else. So we can just specify any number of inputs here, but here I just have one. And what we're doing with it is we're taking it from here. So input dot input1 has the number, and then we just make it into a variable. I won't explain you the prime number logic. You'll have to go Stack Overflow on your own time. What I will explain you is what do we do when we actually want to return out of this script, because that's something where we're doing something a bit AppGyver specific. So the first case where we actually want to get out of this function is if the number is 1, because 1 is neither prime or composite number. So it's basically we're saying, well, this is a little bit of a stupid question to ask if 1 is prime, because we already know the answer. And then we are returning this structure here, which is basically an array. And this kind of represents one of the outputs. So if we look here, get out from here, we can see that this thing has 2 outputs, which I've specified. And this flow function also has 2 outputs. So we're like in the success case, we're outputting from here. And in the negative case, we're outputting from the bottom output. So these are the 2 outputs that we're talking about. And the outputs are indexed from 0. So basically, in the case of 1, I want to come out of the error output saying that it's neither prime or composite number, because I only want the prime numbers to come out of the success output. So what I'm outputting here is simply an array, and it has two things. It has the output object and then the output number indexed from 0. So 1 is really output 2. Now all the JavaScript developers are like, yeah, we know, but still warrant saying this. Now, if the result is prime, then we output some text from the first output, the success output, by doing the same structure of returning an array with 0, which denotes the first output, and then this result object with some text. And then if it's not prime, we come out of the second output again. And if nothing else happens in the loop, then it's not prime either. And that's basically how we need to adapt the JavaScript code here. And here on the left side, right side, I can specify how many outputs does this have and what kind of data types they output. So it's a bit hard to see in this editor, but basically the way it goes here is output 1, the value type is object, and then we specify that it has this result object with that has a text as a property. So we have an object as the result, and then it has a property called result, which is a piece of text, and that's what we're outputting. And it's the same thing, just for simplicity, for the error output. Now it could be also different things, but here it's the same thing. And then, of course, for this custom flow function, we also have some properties. We can give it a name. We can give it more inputs from also here if we want, like different types of inputs. And that's really how it works. And here I also want to say like a little bit about like the philosophy of JavaScript in AppGyver. So it's not like you can do anything and everything in JavaScript. Like that would go a little bit against the point of having a no-code tool. But what you can certainly have is you basically have this box of JavaScript where you can do things, you can manipulate data, you can run like algorithms and things, and then you can output that data to be then like further processed by AppGyver flow functions. There's quite a bit of details to this, so if you really want to get into this, then the documentation on appgyver.com is a good way to understand some of these things, and simply also like a little bit of trial and error and working here. I'll still show you like what you get out of the box if you just use the JavaScript node in case you've never seen it. So here you can see like a really simple case. So it gives you one input, which is called input 1, like in my example, and then it simply returns whatever you put in here with uppercase. So here it's actually, because this only has one output, it doesn't need to do the thing where you tell which output you're coming out of. It just returns you the result object, and then this is the panel how you start working from. Now that was a bit abstract. So then I might move on to some more productive use of JavaScript here still while I have some time. So I thought we might parse some CSV, since that's definitely very useful in all contexts. So I have this upload button, and then I can open a CSV document which has all of 2 lines. And then it generates this output of the CSV. So if we want to see what do I have in there, it's basically this name, email, phone number, address thing, and then the values for that. And then somehow with this button, I'm taking this file and turning it into some data that AppGyver can actually read and process. And I apologize for the layout, but I think the point here is the JavaScript. So let's look into that. And we need to save before going over there. So there's 2 things happening here. We have the upload CSV button. We can see that we're using one of the regular functions, which is called pick files. That simply opens the file picker, and then you can like put 1 or more files in there. Then we have our own stuff. In this case, not this is actually just a regular JavaScript function. So as you can see, it's not like a flow function, but it could be made into one if we want to be all fancy about it. This is the devtober parse CSV function. And then finally, we're simply taking the output and setting the context data from the CSV into AppGyver context variable. And then let's look in here in the parse CSV function. There's again some applied general code from Stack Overflow. So the way the pig files works, it actually gives you a list of files, and what it gives you about those files is their location as a URL, and that can be like a file URL, or if you're working in the browser, it's actually this thing called blob URL. So this basically like in-memory address for the CSV file. Now, that is not important. What is important is, in this case, we're actually taking the first one of those files because we're saying that we're going to parse one CSV file, not many. So we are ignoring everything else except the first file, even if you select multiple. And then basically, we're getting from the file list. So let me show you what AppGyver gives you out of pig files. Actually, this is probably the way to do it. So yeah, so it gives you this files array. It's a list of objects with 6 properties, and you can definitely figure out what those properties are. You can, maybe we can see it here. So yeah, this is the documentation. So what the pig files gives you is a list of objects with 6 properties. You get the name, path is what you care about, then you get the size, MIME type, created at, modified at. So basically like this object with the file properties, and that's what we're feeding in here. So what we're doing is we're getting the path from the file object because that's what we care about. Then we use fetch on that path, and we want the result as text. Now, one thing that AppGyver documentation mentions is that this thing actually is wrapped in an async basically block anyway. So you can use await directly here anywhere you want because it's already like behind the scenes in an async block, which is kind of nice. So we just use await on the fetch on the file path. Then we do a bunch of this CSV magic, which is basically the idea of all of this is to get us 2 things, is to get the headers. So the property names from the header row of the CSV, aka this thing, so the name, email, phone number, and address. And then we want to turn it into an object that's a bit handier. So we want basically out of the 2 rows, we want a list of objects that has the header names as proper, like property, like key value type properties from those. And then we just return that. And I actually have a console log here. So if you're working in the browser, you can use console log here. So if I look here in my console, I can actually see my console log, and it's showing me the end result after my CSV function. And we can see that I've turned the CSV successfully into this like name, value, address value, email value, and then we have another object here type of data. And this fits very well with the AppGyver way of like thinking about objects and things. So that's what we have there. And then we simply return this out from our function. And then where is it going? It's going out of output 1, and it's ending up into the set page variable where we're putting it into the context variable. So this one, and so the downside of doing something like this, whereas you work with the data connections and things where you get automatic schemas, no automatic schemas for you with JavaScript. So you would have to build the schema here if you want to use it elsewhere in AppGyver. I'm actually choosing a little bit of a different thing to create this CSV view, which is the final thing that I'm going to talk about.
Maybe
yeah.
before you do that, there's a question from the audience. Sure. About in your JavaScript block there, the little snippet you had. How are errors or exceptions managed inside that function?
So that's the other thing, that you don't have like, you can certainly, so you can use the two outputs here. So if you think about the previous function that I have, so what I would do for like a production level thing is I would create another output as I had with the prime numbers one. So this one has two outputs. And I mean, if you have a raw JavaScript error here, then that's pretty much it. So probably what you want to write is some code that does the assertions you want, and then via some like try catch ends up always like coming out of this error output. But that's like, you can specify multiple outputs, and by specifying them, then you can create this thing where you have a success case and a fail case, like the native flow functions in AppGyver. And then but it's true that there isn't like any built-in error management for the JavaScript code. So you need to use try catch and use software development to basically make it tight. But I mean, that's the case usually when you're writing JavaScript, that no one, like the framework is not going to be holding your hand that much if you do your own thing. Yes. So what I did here is, you can notice that I put this CSV here and then it generates it over here. So what did we have on this page below here? And I was like, well, I can build the schema, and then I can do all the stuff like pick the properties and things. But what would be cool would be actually to take a data structure and then simply render that without knowing much about that data structure. So I actually decided that I only need to know two things about my to visually render this thing. So I need to know what the data is, and then I need to know what the keys, aka what the header row is. So what I've done here, again using my favorite technique of like looking at variable changes, is that the moment the parse CSV function is done and updates the context variable, I'm actually going here and then I'm doing a little bit of this map is simply to make this palatable for because to work in the repeats in AppGyver require that you have this key value kind of structure, and this keys only returns me the keys as a flat array. So I want to just use the map. So don't worry about the map. That's just to turn things into this like more multi-dimensional array for the repeat property. So I want the keys out of the context because I want to know what the property names are, aka the name, email, and so on. So that's one thing that I'm doing. Because then I want to use the keys array here and basically repeat this cell. So I have a row here, and then I have the cells inside it, and I'm using the keys to repeat. So as many headers as I have, I will get cells within there, and then within each cell I'm actually like picking the property name, and maybe we can oh yeah, this doesn't actually show it. So but yeah, basically what I'm doing with the keys is turning them, with the map, is turning them into these kind of items. That's an object, and then it has a property called name, and then I can use this will be then the header property, because that's how AppGyver repeats work. So yeah, first getting the keys, then have a row here, and then make as many cells as we have headers for. And then this lower thing, actually the data row is much more simple. So that's simply using the contacts page variable contents, which I know to be this property. And then here I'm actually again repeating with the keys because I just want to render all of them. And this is the final bit that then makes this work, because I have the keys and I have the data and I'm repeating each row. So I'm basically, what I'm doing here is I have the object, and then I'm just picking each property by the key name, because I have all the keys for all the properties. So this is how I can make it work independent, like without having to say anywhere what the property names or things are. So I just have the keys and I just have the data, and then I can loop through it with this structure. I'm sure you have done, some of you have done something like this in JavaScript and other languages when you have. The nice thing about this is that basically now that CSV parsing thing and this display works with pretty much any CSV content, because we are independent of any specific keys or value structures. And I think with that, 5 minutes to the hour, I need to hand it over to some final questions and feelings regarding this presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, because you've done such a good job of answering the questions as we go, there's no current questions queued up. About the only thing that, and I answered this one in the chat, but if you want to add to it, someone was asking about some sort of trial or free way to get started with AppGyver, and I posted the link to appgyver.com, where right there you can sign up and get access to the free community edition, and let people know that it is planning to come to the BTP free tier soon as well. Link to the roadmap item in the Discovery Center for that.
Yes.
But I don't know if there's anything additional you want to add to that question.
No, at this time. So you still have appgyver.com for the community edition, and then you have those upcoming items for SAP AppGyver on the BTP. Yes, that fulfills that.
Yeah,
quite well.
Yeah, I did a couple places you referenced earlier when you referenced the documentation. I put the link to that in the chat, so anybody that heard that and wants to find it, it is docs.appgyver.com. Pretty easy to find, but there's a link in the chat to that. But otherwise, we're all caught up.
Yes, and I had a little recap of all the things. So just something about custom components. Perhaps we can share these materials, and and then I had these share tokens for accessing these things that I actually put on the marketplace. So if you put these things, which we can maybe get into the chat, at least after this call.
I can add it to the description of the video rather than the chat after the call.
Yeah, we'll add it. Yeah, let's add it to the description of the video. You'll find them there. So basically, if you're using the community edition, you can then the way you use these things is basically you take that token and then you go to the marketplace and you put the token in the search, and then you can find the thing that is pointed to at there. So then you can see how I've been inspect those things, like research them and use them as base to your own things. Yeah. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for your time and interest in this, and hopefully I managed to show you at least something interesting that maybe broadened your AppGyver horizons a bit.
Yes, very cool. I know I learned more than a few things here today. That was really great. And for those of you that are interested, we actually have the 7 tips for from an SAP AppGyver guru, if you're watching us live, that will start here in just 2 minutes. I put the link to that next video in the chat. So if you want to stick around, just click on over there and join up with the next session. Otherwise, thank you very much for taking the time, and I know it's late for you, but the audience appreciates it. Excellent session. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you in the next Devtoberfest session in just a few minutes.
Go there. Thank you very much. Good night.
There we go. The stream is ended.